Morning to you. It's always a pleasure to have you with us. You're watching Inside Politics. We've just begun, so you're right on time. My name is Jesse Rogers. A lot to discuss. I mean, after months of political anxiety, push and pull, political shadow boxing, the Building Bridges Initiative report is finally out. We saw the two handshake principles. President Uhuru Kenyatta and ODM leader Raila Odinga received the report on Wednesday, urging Kenyans to go through the report by themselves. Well, it's definitely all out there. We've been urged to seize the constitutional moment. Now, join us as we break down this 204-page document highlighting the wins, the gains, what we think should be done into this document to make it better for the common mwananchi. Now, a lot to discuss about expanded executive and the legislature. We also have a lot to do with the proposed reforms at the electoral body IEBC. Will this actually ensure the safe and transparent process in elections? We'll also take a look at a win for devolution as they increase its allocation to 35. That's a proposal. We'll highlight that. Also, the youth agenda in the BBI report. Will this actually satisfy the largely youthful population in the country? A lot to talk about. We'll definitely delve deeper. Let me just introduce our panelists today who will be helping me dissect this 204-page document, taking a look at what we need to carry forward. I'll first start with a new face. He's been lost for quite a while, Kakai Kissinger, who's a political analyst, and needless to say, he was part of the experts engaged in putting together the BBI report. We're also joined by Dismas Mukua, who's a political risk analyst, Kipchumba Karuri, who's an advocate and political strategist, Mark Bichachi, makes a comeback. He's a communication strategist, and it's been a while. Jerotich Sei, welcome back. She's a humanitarian consultant. Many thanks for your time, gentlemen and lady. Looking forward to your contribution right here on Inside Politics. Now, I'd like to begin on a note where we actually take a look at some of the recommendations proposed in the BBI report. Let's just take a look at some of the things you should expect to be the major talking points as we go forward. Now, some changes have been made to Parliament. The introduction of the leader of the official opposition. We also have an increase in the number of elected members of Parliament, 360 of them from the 290 constituencies. In the Senate, 94 senators, one man, one woman per county. That's definitely something we'll discuss about in the gender card. Court of Appeal judgment to handle election petitions, some of the reforms in the judiciary, including the office of the Ombudsman, which has been introduced in the proposals, a 5-year term of Court of Appeal. We'll definitely discuss about the judiciary, including the High Court President, the Judiciary Ombudsman as a member of the JSC, as I had mentioned earlier on. Taking a look at one of the core issues, the IEBC membership. This has been a talking point for quite some time, ever since the BBI report was released on Wednesday. Political parties to appoint 4 members. We delve into this, whether it's a win or a loss for the common mwananchi. Taking a look at validity of presidential elections, the presidential election case to be heard and determined within 30 days. Let's take a look at one more in terms of the BBI report. What stands out? Well, basically, that's the last one in terms of the graphics we had prepared, but a lot more in the 204-page document. And I'd like to start on that note. Kakai Kissinger, let me bring you into this particular conversation, and I'd like you to start us off because you are involved in the preparation of the BBI report. Take us through what exactly the BBI report was aiming to solve in the 9 thematic agendas that brought President Uhuru Kenyatta and Raila Odinga together. Let's build basis so we can go forth from there.
Thank you very much for inviting me and for us having this kind of discussion today. I think we all remember that the BBI is a product of what happened exactly after the last election. And then there was we always say that in Kenya we have very divisive elections, and that principle of the winner take it all. So based on that background and some historical injustices, the BBI was then anchored or brokered between His Excellency President Uhuru Kenyatta and, of course, the former Prime Minister Raila Odinga. So that's what they actually called initially the handshake. Based on that, they put up a team together, which was the task force, and the task force came up with about 9 items that they felt that over time, since 1963, although we have had several amendments, several changes to the constitution and so forth and so on, including the 2010 constitution, there are those 9 issues that were still thorny, and Kenyans needed to have a discussion on those 9 issues and deal with them. Some of them were issues like, for example, lack of ethos, responsibilities and rights, ethnic competition, divisive election, and I think you have talked about it already, inclusivity, shared prosperity, corruption, devolution, and safety and security. So those were the 9 issues that by and large were the basis of the BBI, and by and large were the basis why the handshake came in place. The thinking at that time between the two principles was that when we settle those 9 issues that I've talked about, then we will, as a country, move forward and be very progressive. Constitutions are tailored, constitutions are made, but we have to remember that constitutions are living documents, and these documents can be changed at any given time. So based on that, then the task force established. They went throughout the country from one county to another county and came up with the initial task force report, which was then subjected to Kenyans to discuss those 9 issues that I've talked about. That was a very comprehensive document. And then after that, they realized that there's need for them now then to crystallize those 9 issues that we spoke about and give them action. And action was based on 4 things. 1, there were administrative issues to be undertaken on every of the 9 items. 2, there were constitutional issues or constitutional bill to be prepared on any of the 9 issues. 3, there was a policy document to be prepared. And finally, there was a legislative document to be prepared, because those 9 issues had then to follow or fall into those 4 categories that I've talked about. So basically, that was the output. And now what we are now having, and remember there was massive public participation where the task force came up with a working document and methodology in which they reached out to every single Kenyan through either media, through receiving memorandums, through giving personal opinion, and so forth and so on. So that document that we are now discussing has come that process, and it's almost a final document, because now the steering committee, which now mutated from the task force, has given clear indications of the 9 issues and packed them into policy, administration, legislative, and legal consequences. So what the document now we have is out there for people to understand where the journey has come from.
Kekai, I thank you for laying basis into this journey so far. Dismas Mukua, just as he's mentioned, one of the ills that faces Kenya, and that's what the BBI sorted to cure as well, is the divisive elections. As we take a look at the expanded executive, this has been a talking point for most Kenyans because, I mean, the office of the Prime Minister has been introduced, coming with 2 deputy prime ministers. What do you make of the talk that has been going so far in terms of one side, we have an expanded executive, more for the taxpayers to actually, to finance, and on the other side, we have the message of inclusivity?
Thanks a lot. Now, in my view, what we need to look at in this document is the intention of the handshake. And it's very clear to all and sundry that every 5 years, we tend to have a tension in Kenya. 1 year before the election and 1 year after the election, there's always a political tension. And this is because majority of Kenyans are not sure whether the electoral body, in this case IEBC, is going to deliver on a good job. So in my view, this BBI report is a very good attempt at sanitizing IEBC to ensure that they come up with predictable systems for unpredictable outcomes. The reason why people get into violence every 5 years is because of IEBC. They're not sure whether IEBC is actually independent or is a special purpose vehicle for some cartels. So BBI makes a very good attempt, but it now needs to be broken down to what Mora and Wanjiku can actually appreciate, that IEBC is going to be reformed in a manner that they run a free, fair, and credible election. The idea of giving the electoral officers a 3-year contract is commendable. And also I've seen some of the proposed amendments so that anybody who is going to be running elections in Kenya, if you make a mistake or an error of omission or commission, you take criminal responsibility. You recall that from the time we attained independence, not a single employee of any electoral body, that's the current IEBC, has ever been taken to a court of law, whether or not they've made mistakes. But that's a very good attempt. And in my view, Kenyans should not be worried about the creation of the position of a prime minister or even including many more positions. If we need a few more positions to create stability in Kenya so that we can engage in socioeconomic growth, I don't see a big deal. And if you are afraid of the public wage bill, then we can prorata and say that if you're going to be running for elections in 2022, then the salaries of the elected leaders has been reduced by a certain percentage, maybe 30% to contain the public wage bill. But more important, if you control corruption, then we shouldn't be afraid of the wage bill. And one assumes that the leaders we are going to elect to the various houses are going to catalyze the economy so that at the end of the day, the public wage bill becomes immaterial. But the challenge would be in the office of the prime minister and depending on which party the prime minister comes from. Let's look at one scenario. If the president comes from party A and the prime minister comes from party B and the opposition leader comes from party B, then it's going to be a bit of a challenge on how we are going to run Kenya. You recall during the 2007 elections, the president was Mwai Kibaki, but Raila Odinga had a majority in the National Assembly. Now, if you have that scenario, then the BBI report needs to come up with a solid structure to ensure that we are not going to have a turbulence if especially the president doesn't have a majority and the person who becomes the prime minister and the person who becomes the opposition leader have got absolute control of the House. But more important for us to make progress, there is a valid expectation that Raila Odinga and his brother President Kenyatta are going to call every single voice in Kenya, whether they all divergent views, so that we have a cross-pollination of ideas, so that we have an intellectual intercourse to ensure that everybody goes forward. So this idea of saying that we want to have a BBI to the exclusion of some political leaders, some political heavyweights in Kenya is unacceptable. So there's an expectation that tomorrow at Bomas, we are going to have a President Kenyatta, we are going to have Raila Odinga, we are going to have Musalia Mudavadi, we are going to have Wetangula, and more important, we are going to have William Samoei Ruto, because those are the people with the heaviest political capital in Kenya. All of them should come so that we have a document that every Kenyan sees himself part and parcel of.
Equity is very important and it's one of the key agendas of the BBI. Mark Bichachi, I mean, there has been talk of the reintroduction of the Imperial Presidency. I'd like you to address this point. Are we looking to going back to the Kenyatta days in the 1960s and 70s? Just highlight on this so Kenyans can actually know what we're talking about in this proposed report.
I am glad you asked me this question because the term Imperial Presidency is quite funny to me, because an Imperial President, as described in the 1960s America, was a president who, one, has gone beyond the constitutional powers given to him by the Constitution, and number two, it is one who has become uncontrollable. And I want the viewers to underline the term uncontrollable. Now, the proponents of the ideology that the presidency is imperial are basing their argument on the fact that the president can dismiss the prime minister. First, I would like to remind all of them that the president can dismiss any minister even today. Number two, you cannot be an imperial president if your powers must be exercised through the offices of a prime minister and two deputies. In fact, what has happened to the presidency is that it is now a diluted function, requiring there to be cooperation between his office and the office of the prime minister. So I wonder how you reduce the powers of an office and then at the same time declare it an imperial presidency. But this is arisen from a very simple background to how people are viewing BBI. That two ways where people are viewing BBI and opposing BBI from. Number one, it is the assumption that BBI is jobs for the boys. So they imagine that somehow in 2022, Uhuru Kenyatta is going to run for parliament, become the leader of a majority of parliamentarians, and then get selected by whoever has won an election to become prime minister. I must tell you that all of those are democratic processes. It is nearly impossible to manipulate all the 290 constituents to ensure that you become prime minister. But the second prism by which this is being viewed is the general dislike and distrust of leadership in this country. And therefore, if it has been spoken by Uhuru Kenyatta, there are people who feel duty-bound to oppose anything. If Uhuru Kenyatta came out tomorrow and said the sky is blue, they will certainly disagree and declare it green. So when you look at it from their perspective, it therefore becomes of paramount importance to paint the BBI report with broad strokes, make it as negative as possible without determining what is the jurisprudence and what is the precedent set by other countries. I tell you here and now, the Queen of England can dismiss the Prime Minister of Britain, the Prime Minister of Canada and Australia. On top of that, the president of Germany, on no less than 3 occasions, in fact, quite as recently as 2002, dissolved the entirety of parliament. And these are non-executive presidents. So the prerogative of the president, as expressed through the will of the people, should be held sacrosanct and paramount. And number 2, the duties of the prime minister must always be in line with the wishes and the desires of the people as expressed by the president. And therefore, the president has the leeway, as he does today, to fire any minister as they all serve at his behest and pleasure. To say this is an imperial presidency is to rewrite the very meaning of the word imperial and to try to manipulate the Kenyan people to a sense where they feel that the presidency has somehow been given more powers, when in reality, the powers of the presidency have been reduced.
Mark Bichachi, you've made it very clear the imperial presidency notion is definitely something that seems to be made up. But I'd like to shift focus a little bit to the IEBC. Jeritich, say, if you give us your take on this. The BBI wants the current commissioners out, and it's also proposing parties to pick 4 commissioners. As we discuss about the proposed changes to the IEBC, which is a very core issue in terms of the electoral reform and the journey to electoral reforms, as I've just mentioned. Let's take a look at one of the press statements that was released by the IEBC in regards to the proposed changes in the independent body. If we can just have it on our screens right now, it's simply touching on what the IEBC chair, Wafula Chebukati, mentions as criminality and unsuitability to hold office. That narrative perhaps has been driven by certain members of political class and is meant to incite the members of the public with the intention of mob lynching the commission and its staff, and also to create justification for the clean slate recommendation in the BBI report. Jero, what is your take on this? Is Wafula Chebukati clutching on straws? What do you make it?
Thank you very much, Jesse. I think there are not even any straws that he could be clutching on. You know, when I think about the handshake and the fact that Right Honorable Raila Odinga, His Excellency Uhuru Kenyatta, came together and said, we want to bring to an end the current tension in the country and all the things that were a precursor to this process that we're discussing today. For me, if I were to even have had a little bit of faith and hope in the process, the one and only thing they should have said they were going to do to bring to an end divisive politics would be to overhaul the IEBC. This is the root cause. It is not me hating Dismas or hating Kakai or hating Oliver or hating Mark or hating you, Jesse, for voting one way or another. It is for me the consistent subversion of the will of the people through rigging at the ballot. And we saw what happened in 2017, And we saw how the elections were annulled. We saw another one again, we saw another one again in October 26. But if you go back to 2007, that people keep making reference to, what was the problem there? It wasn't that Kalenjins and Kikuyu started killing each other. It was a subverted, corrupted IEBC process. In those days, it was not IEBC. It was the Electoral Commission. So I just want to say that for me, if we were going to make any significant headway as Kenyans and bring to an end the conflict and crises that we face every single electoral cycle, we would need to look at issues of the IEBC. That said, when I read the report and I read the recommendations, the idea of the politicization of the selection of commissioners within the IEBC is something that I have big problems with. Whatever the intention was, even going back to 2016 when there was even a court process around that, whatever the original intention was, the minute you begin to politicize the IEBC by allowing political parties to select, identify, be involved somehow in the IEBC process, it loses its independence. So I think it would be a case of out of the frying pan and into the fire. That said, Jesse, I have referred to long before the factions started over politicizing BBI, I have been somebody who stood really strongly against the process, and I referred to it as a Trojan horse. As Trojan horse is finally in the city, the belly of the horse has been opened. We have this report. We have these recommendations. And now I hear from even my colleagues that we are faced with binary options. It's either or. We have already been corralled. We're in a city and the horse's belly has been opened, and we're not faced with multiple opportunities and choices as the people of Kenya. We are told you're either for it or against it. And if you're for it, then you're with one political faction. If you're against it, you're with another political faction. This, for me, is the problem, because any debate and discussion we want to have around this will drive us down those invariable paths of political sensibilities or identities that we hold, and then it stops being an intellectual, spiritual, emotional, social discussion amongst Kenyans, and it becomes the survival of the fittest. Because even those today who are opposed to the BBI are the same group that would have been happily on the pro-BBI and amendment section if it suited them politically. So this, for me, is what makes me sad. We're not really able to have a debate. And when His Excellency the President launched the report in Kisii a few days ago, I remember very clearly that he said, we welcome feedback. Not negative feedback, but we welcome feedback. So he was already setting the stage in terms of the type of feedback he was expecting to receive around the BBI. So anything that is not for or that is not moderately constructive will be seen as against, and we will be fighting that way instead of the actual issues. If we could delve into what this report says, and have the option to genuinely say, no, I'm not for this, I'm not for moving forward with this, or yes, I am, then the next step would be, if we ended up in a referendum process, would my no count? Would my yes count? These are the things I think about. But that said, I'm so happy that so many Kenyans are actually reading this document. Last year, towards the end when it was released, very few had read it. People were speculating. They didn't quite know what it was saying. And those of us who had read it, or the first iteration, were actually accused of either being Tanga-Tanga, Kieleweke, ODM, this and that and the other. So I'm quite pleased that more people are reading it. And the more people read it, the more we can engage constructively and sensibly around.
Thanks for your point. It's definitely home. We'll give Oliver Kipchumba a chance to respond and also give his take on the expanded executive and IEBC. Let's just take a short break. And I'm also sure Kakai has something to say about the BBI in terms of Jero's sentiments, in terms of what the document entails. Also, when we come back, expect to take a look at the latest wins in terms of devolution, which is a good way to look at it, from 15% to 35% in terms of increase in allocation to the devolved units. We'll also take a look at the expanded legislature. We have around 94 senators in the Senate, and also increased 360 MPs in the National Assembly. We assess this wins and misses. Stay with Inside Politics.
Points that we have raised.
The proposal in enhancing gender parity has recommended that those